Indonesia oil and gas bureaucracy reform? Beijing, 10 of June 2014. The world's proved oil reserves at the end of 2012 reached 1,688 billion barrels, sufficient to meet 52.9 years of global production. The number has increased by 26% or nearly 350 billion barrels over the past decade, or 60% from 1,039.3 billion barrels in 1992. The data is from BP Statistical Review World Energy June 2013. The growing numbers shows oil and gas activities involving technology and highly invested human capital make this possible. Indonesia's proved reserves of oil, which is defined as those quantities that geological and engineering information indicates with reasonable certainty can be recovered in the future from non-reservoirs under existing economic and operating conditions. In 2002 and 2011 are 5.6, 4.7, and 3.7 billion barrels respectively. To put this into perspective, Brunei and Malaysia's proved reserves of oil is 1.1 and 3.7 billion barrels. In Asia Pacific, Indonesia is number 4 below China, India, Vietnam, and Australia. However, Asia Pacific only contributes 2.5% of the total world proved reserves of oil. South and Central America, Middle East, North America, Africa, Europe, and Eurasia, then followed by Asia Pacific, are the sequence of the area of the distribution of proved reserves from the largest to the lowest. While global oil production has a positive trend increased, Indonesia experiences a decline trend from 1,437,000 in 2003 to less than 840,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, BOEPD, in 2014. Dividing the reserves in Indonesia at the end of 2011 by the production at the end of that year, which is 918,000 BOEPD, will give us 11 years, which is the RP ratio. By definition, it is the length of time that those remaining reserves would last if production were continue at that rate. Following the growth trend of global oil consumption, Indonesia's consumption keeps increasing from 1,184,000 in 1992 to 1,565,000 in 2012 daily. It looks big, but comparing with Singapore, from 739 in 92 to 1255 in 2012, the growth is relatively small in terms of per capita or per kilometer square of area. It is important to observe that among those factors above, while the consumption growth is following the trend, the oil production and the proved oil reserves is to the contrary. Hence, the ultimate remedy is to find more proved oil reserves and to increase than to optimize the oil production. The most measurable mean in achieving those is to do exploration and exploitation activities. This requires investors to come and to explore. However, as you can see from the numbers above, in deciding their business portfolio, they are comparing Indonesia with other areas or countries in the world. If Indonesia is not more attractive in terms of 1. Potential findings, 2. Oil and gas regime, 3. Sanctity of the contract, they will not enter Indonesia. Or if they have been here, then they will pull out from Indonesia. Their ultimate goal is simply to maximize their shareholder value. Nothing personal. The first attraction should not be an issue here because according to IAGE, there are more than 22 basins being unexplored. 15 basins have been drilled, no hydrocarbons found yet, and 7 basins where hydrocarbon have been found but not yet in production. It means the opportunity is all there. The second attraction about having reliable oil and gas regime is not a question for Indonesia. People must know that PSC, Production Sharing Contract, was originated in Indonesia and was launched in this very country in 1966. The Indonesian's concept of PSC has been profoundly adopted around the world by many sovereign countries, oil exporters, and some oil producers. Many people easily dismiss the PSCs simply because they are nervous of the phrase cost recovery, without knowing the details of this great concept. The devil is in the detail. Hence, many negative comments about cost recovery may be caused by the ignorance of common people to understand the detail of its meaning and the application of such concept. Finally, the third attraction should not be applicable also for Indonesia in this new era of democracy, unless Indonesia breaches the interpretation of the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 626 and the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, 1960, and its resolution number 1803 of 1962. The right of states to nationalize companies or requisition them in the national interest is acknowledged in the above UN resolution as a corollary of their sovereignty over their natural resources. But these resolutions also require that a public interest is demonstrated and that fair and prior compensation is paid. Nationalization without or with inadequate compensation discourages new petroleum exploration and encourages alienation of a country. On the other hand, under no circumstances, as a dignified country, Indonesia should beg them to come at all costs just for the sake of having some investors. Indonesia's ultimate goal is none other than to maximize the utilization of the potential for people's welfare. All frameworks to be established by the governmental bodies and the parliament must be pivot around that ultimate goal. It should not deviate at all to enrich a group of people, or a party, or a family, or a faction only. If the underlying assumption of finding methods to increase oil reserve and its production is purely for the benefit of the people, then one must admit it is such a noble and shall be applied at its very utmost effort and supported throughout. Arithmetically speaking, to increase the production up to 1,400,000 BOEPD as in 2003 requires an additional 600,000 BOEPD production. If a 20,000 to 35,000 BOPD is considered major discovery, which means it is not a day-to-day thing, then it needs 30 additional producing fields. If the probability of finding oil says around 10 to 30% and we choose 20% as the denominator, then it requires 150 new blocks announced in the licensing round. If we wish to achieve 1,400,000 BOPD in 7 years from now, then we must have started yesterday. Is 7 years feasible? Well, it took only 5 years for Unocal, from its initial discovery in 1998, to start developing the West Seno in Makassar Strait in 2003. Having said that, there is an infamous block that has been 14 years since its finding and has not yet commenced the production. Is 30 new blocks possible in a round? Well, in 1997 to 1998, there were no less than 35 new PSCs signed. One may argue that despite 250 new PSCs signed after 1968, the decline still happens after reaching its peak. Well, it is true that there is no proof of positive correlation between having more blocks and having a production increase. However, that is the least one can do in the life cycle of an oil field, signing the block. Thinking out of the box, yes, we can. PT Pertamina announced its plan to increase current oil and gas output from 465,220 BOAPD to 2.2 million BOAPD in 11 years, where 30% will come from domestic effort. The government must support Pertamina's effort because their success may contribute 50% into the effort to reach 1.4 million BOPD in 7 years, hypothetical scenario. Do the right thing right in the first time is the key for achieving the goal. We have attended all the above hypothetical questions related to technical competence. Now it comes to answering the human capital behind the underlying assumption that all people of Republic of Indonesia should share the wealth. People who are involved in the decision-making process without reasonable doubt must undergo a bureaucracy reform. Number one, to revisit the idea of a perceived superpower executing body of oil and gas, to return to its calling as a monitoring body, not a challenging body, by empowering more competent oil and gas forensic auditors. Number two, to revisit the oil and gas law, including the supply chain regulation, in facing a new challenging environment of $100 per barrel oil price, B, the scarcity of the resources, and C, the increase of cost of lifting, where adopting early new technology is a must. Then number three, to have an efficient methodology to allow an apt decision-making process without breaching the law among ministries, energy and mineral, environment, manpower, law and human rights, administrative reform, and other interrelated ministries or regional governments.